Hey, we've done a lot of redesign here at CISO Tradecraft, and we've got some really useful tools. And I want to introduce you to the person who created them using a really cool technique that you might be able to do too. Stick around. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your co-host, and I have Ross Young with me today, who has done some amazing stuff in the last couple of months. Not to say getting out his own book, which we'll kind of talk about this, but we're not plugging the book. We're going to be talking about CISO Tradecraft and some of the really, really cool things that we have on our website. So, Ross, welcome back.
Hey, thanks again, and I hope everybody's having a wonderful Christmas week. Super excited to be here with you today, G-Mark.
Yeah, I'm up here, different background, of course, visiting my son and grandson, and he's got all kinds of really cool toys. We're not going to divert too much into it, but he does have like a little video game that has like Pac-Man and 11 other games in there, and it's just like kid size. And right now he's kind of screaming because he wants to come down to the basement and play with it. So I have to go deal with that. So anybody who's ever tried to work from home, you understand. But I don't have my little dog with me this time. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing here at CISO Tradecraft and some of the really cool stuff you've created and then how you created it. I think that'd be fascinating for everybody.
Yeah, so I've really wanted to improve my skills the last couple months. And of course, AI is all the rage. But to be specific, I think AI is really changing how we're coding. And what I mean by that is historically, if you wanted to learn a programming language, you had to spend a lot of time learning Python or C++. That world doesn't exist anymore. The world is changing so much that the way you're going to program is in English, right? So people like me are using vibe coding, which is we're not writing HTML. We're asking Google Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT to write code in English, and it spits out the HTML or Python code for ourselves. So I'm excited to share with you some of the free templates that I've been able to build over the last couple weeks and give it away as our kind of 12 Days of Christmas giveaway here at CISO Tradecraft.
Now, as a former commercial software developer, I had a couple of products under my belt, although they're probably obsolete because they were written in languages that are considered dead languages almost. So it's kind of interesting that you look at how things go forward. And of course, one of the concerns for those of us who might have kids in college or headed toward college is like a computer science degree. It used to be, hey, you learn how to program, learn how to code, be a developer, and live happily ever after. And we found out that in 2024, 2025, some of the job opportunities that are coming out of the university level are not what they should be. But what you're suggesting is that don't give up. Don't tell your kids to go ahead and become plumbers, but rather if they could master a different way of generating their code. And of course, it's going to create an entire new industry of securing AI-generated code. But that's maybe for a next episode. We'll get into a little bit more detail. So let's look into some of the stuff that you've created and give folks a tour a little around the CISO Tradecraft website where you put it.
Sure. So let me just go ahead and share my window right here. And what you should see is the brand new CISOTradecraft.com website. And if you're on the podcast, make sure you check out the video on YouTube because you're going to see the video and show you through the screens as we actually walk you through things. So in here on this new design, you're going to see a picture of G-Mark and myself. You're also going to see some of the latest videos, and you're going to have links to the podcast, to LinkedIn, and to our Substack newsletter. The other things you're also going to notice, there's a nice coaching section. There's stuff on our courses. We are now starting to offer multiple courses. So there's one on the art of soft skills and another one on, mastering the budget in cybersecurity. But today we really want to focus on this one called free templates. And it's all about learning how to secure smarter, not harder. And we have 12 free templates. You just go to CISOTradecraft.com, click on free templates, or you can just type in CISOTradecraft.com/free templates, and it takes you right there.
Well, that sounds great. And this looks like it's pretty good. So first of all, we're just looking at it, says, okay, we got 12 things, but it's more than that. So if you kind of scroll down a little bit, you can see that we've got 12 different things. We're going to take a look at each one of these to show you how you might use them. And then, of course, I want to learn a little bit about the vibe coding portion of this, because this is very robust stuff. You look at it and you say, like, man, if I had to code these things, it would take me a month to go through there. Well, I'm not a professional web coder, but I can figure stuff out. But let's go ahead and roll back to the top. We'll take a look at the first one, the 9-box template. So if you click on that, you can see that, it's free. So that's kind of nice. Everybody likes things that are free. But let's talk about how we prioritize our tasks and why this makes sense to take a look at the importance that we have on things versus, for example, the impact and the effort. So let's discuss that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so the 9-box essentially, here, let me zoom out just so it looks a little cleaner, is a matrix where you have the level of effort, low, medium, and high, and the impact, low, medium, and high. And you can just think of the level of effort as low, less than 90 days, medium, between 90 days and a year, and high effort, greater than a year. Probably things that don't really go away or take a very long time to accomplish. And then impact is maybe reduction in risk, or reduction in material risk that actually harms your company. And it's different for every company, right? If you're talking Bank of America, reducing risk is probably in the millions, if not billions of dollars, versus small, medium business that you're probably talking thousands of dollars. So that's why it's kind of low, medium, high, so you can kind of adapt for your company.
Right, very
And
useful.
what you get to do is you get to go in and put your initiatives. So let's just imagine that you don't have enough money to do 30 projects next year. You only have enough money to do 10 projects because your budget is finite, like every other company. So you come in here and you start saying, well, what are all the initiatives we want to do? And so maybe we're going to add an initiative. Let's call it Zero Trust. We're going to add another initiative. Let's call it SASE. We're going to add another initiative, call it MFA. And what you're going to see here on the left-hand side is it now places your initiatives. You can just click on that, and then you can say Zero Trust. Well, we think Zero Trust is a medium-level effort, but it's actually really going to reduce our thing. So let's just put it under this box 2. And now
Really, all you did is click on the left and then click somewhere in those 9 boxes, and it just drops that marker there. Brilliant.
Exactly. And now you can go here and you can click on MFA. Maybe MFA is a little lighter of an ask. So we're going to put that as a low effort, high impact. And then we're going to actually go in and we're going to look at SASE, and maybe SASE is a high effort, medium one. And so now what you have here is you've placed these 3 things. And the other thing that I want you to look at is it's actually color coded. It goes from green to red. And in each of the boxes, they go 1, you see up here in the top left, 2, and 4. And now I know you might be thinking, well, Ross can't count. Why did he not put the top right as a 3? It's because they're actually numbered in priority order. So this box over here, quick win, you want to fund these activities first. You want to do an important project second, and then you want to do desirable projects third. Now, just because something is in box 9 or box 4 doesn't mean you'll never fund these things. What it means is your preference is to fund the things on the first. But what I would always say is there's 2 types of funding activities. There's compliance things that we have to do, and then there's risk reduction activities that we usually elect to do. So if I have promised my auditors something last year or my regulator something, I'm still probably going to do it even though it may be in box 9. But if I have the option to only do 5 of the 10 things that are risk reduction activities, chances are I want to gear towards things in box 1, 2, and 3 the most.
So this looks like a really useful tool to help us, in our mind, prioritize things from a quick win all the way down to what you call a resource trap, which is a lot of effort, but not a whole lot of impact. And as you're right, though, sometimes compliance requires us to do things that, we say, well, it doesn't make sense from a security perspective, but if we want to stay in business, if we want to avoid fines, we need to do that. So excellent. So our first free cybersecurity template is the 9-box matrix. So let's take a look at the next one, which is the CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Reference Guide, because CMMC has been evolving over the years. I've been in their ecosystem for 4 years now. I keep paying my annual renewal fee to be a registered professional. And now it's CMMC 2 is really kind of kicked into gear. And as of November of 2025, we're in business, so to speak.
So I find CMMC is something I'm hearing a lot of people talking about. They're maybe a little bit worried because they don't truly understand it. And so what I wanted to do was build a template that makes it simple to understand. So the first thing you need to know is there's actually 3 levels of certification within CMMC. The foundational level just says you have to do 17 basic safeguards that align to the FAR 52204-21. Think if this is a federal regulation that anybody selling to DoD is going to comply with.
Right.
The
And
sec-
this is for federal contract information, or we call FCI. So if you're making devices for the government, but all you're dealing with the contracts, one of the things like that, you might not be involved in census stuff because, quick, the overarching thing for CMMC is what we call sensitive but unclassified, or for official use only, or all those other terms, which we have now redescribed as CUI, controlled unclassified information. So what we're doing is we're taking some set of controls to say, look, in the Defense Department, there's an awful lot of companies in the defense industrial base, or the DIB, that are doing stuff that national adversaries would love to be able to go ahead and get their hands on. And so what we're doing is we're formalizing a process and taking it away from the old, oh, yeah, I do it. Yeah, trust me, it's good, to, as you had said, the foundational, which is going to be, yeah, let's get you started with the federal contracting information, to the level 2, which is probably where many companies are going to land into, which is going to be your more advanced. And that's based on the NIST 800-171 book. And then finally, that level 3, which you're still kind of formulating because we're not quite there yet. But there's a lot of controls. And we've moved from a level, or the first version of CMMC, which said everybody had to be certified. And we said, wait a minute, small business, that's going to cost you a fortune doing level 1. So we said, okay, you can self-certify, but you're subject to inspection. But level 2, you got to go ahead and get somebody to come in. And oh, by the way, if you get a consultant to help you, by the way, I do that. I cannot then do the audit. And if you hire a big company, like a big 4.5, I call them that because sometimes somebody's going to merge or go out of business, they can either audit or they can consult, but they can't do both. And so that's one of the guardrails put into the system. So enough of a divergent on the CMMC, but for people who aren't familiar with it, that should give you context. If you're not the defense industrial base, don't say it doesn't apply to you, because other agencies may draw from this experience and start to use the exact same framework because it's based on this.
so when you look at that, you say, how do I really know and understand what's required of me? If you say there's 3 things, there's the foundation, the advanced, and the expert, and you just go in and say, okay, we need to meet the 17 foundation controls. What you can do is you can scroll down over here and you're going to see that they're kind of this blue-green color. Let's call it a teal. And if you hover over any of them, it actually shows you the text description of what that control requires. So you can go in and say, okay, these are the ones that maybe my organization has complied with. And then it actually goes in and updates the radar chart or spider chart for this. And if you look, you can even see how getting these 4 controls on the foundational also helps you with your advanced or expert level controls. And it's really, really helpful because you can just quickly go and see, okay, I've done these 4 controls and, I'm 21% of the way of being compliant for the most advanced level, if you will. And this is just a helpful way where you don't have to go and read 3 different standards to figure out what the control is at each level and how much you're kind of progressing towards that. So as you just start to go and fill things out, you're going to see these different radar charts start to really populate and see just exactly how they look, so that as an organization, you can really understand what's required. And we've even updated it for the latest version. So we have NIST 171, which has 97 controls, and we have NIST 172, which has an additional 35 controls. So you can go ahead and see, do I need 17? Do I need 97? Or do I need, 132 controls in order to check off each of these 3 levels?
And note that in CMMC is you can't turn in a paper that's incomplete. If you say, hey, I'm 88% of the way there, they're like, no, you need to get to 100%. I have a plan of action and milestones to get there. But let's not go down the rat hole on here because we still have 10 more templates to go.
Yeah. So if we go back to our home section, we can talk a little bit about our next one here, which comes from Cloud Security Alliance.
Hmm.
This one is called the Comprehensive AI Control Matrix Questionnaire. And so if you know anything about cloud security, they always put out a bunch of really interesting questionnaires so that you can talk to your vendors and say, are you doing these things? And what I have done is I've pre-populated this questionnaire as a web form. And you can go in and imagine your vendors are using AI, and you're like, well, are they using AI securely? So you can ask them questions about audit and assurance, about independent assessments, about risk-based planning. And it's a simple yes, no, not applicable for the organization. So they go and they fill out all of these controls. And as they start filling out these controls, what you're going to see is you're going to get a dashboard at the end that shows you, hey, how compliant were they amongst all the different controls and all the different requirements of what good AI looks like. You can think of this almost like a NIST CSF maturity, but from a AI perspective that maps to the AI controls matrix created by Cloud Security Alliance. And the other thing that's really cool about this is I made it so that it is something you can reuse. You're allowed to back up everything as a JSON file. You can then import your old JSON files. So if you want to restart where you were, you can continue that. And you can even download it as a PowerPoint so you can take in and provide it to an executive leader during a management session.
That sounds awesome. And yeah, I think the nice thing is for any of us who've ever filled out a survey before, sometimes we're usually on the other end of this thing where we're asked to fill things out. But in this particular case, if we're soliciting information from vendors, it's a great way to go ahead and keep track of that. I love that. Let's keep going. We still got the next row of the Cyber Six Pack. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, so the Cyber Six Pack is really the way I think about vulnerability management. And so I'll first caveat and say, imagine you're in an organization where you're trying to really improve patch management. So maybe you walk in and they're patching at 300 days and you want to get them to patching in less than 30 days. Well, how do you do that? You do that by creating a dashboard that drives accountability and shows metrics. And in this example, I use two metrics. I know they're not perfect. I'm sure there are some really good ways we can explain how they suck, but they do actually help. And the two metrics that we're going to use is what is the average age of vulnerabilities and what is the total number of vulnerabilities. So if you look over here, you're actually going to see, you're going to be able to click on any of these tabs and choose how many managers you have. And so if we just start on manager 1, imagine they have a tool like Qualys. They have a SaaS tool, let's call it Checkmarks. They have a DAS tool, let's call it Web Inspect. They have an SCA tool, let's call it Sneak. They have a cloud security posture management tool, let's call it Wiz. And you're recording how many days old, if you were to look at the average age of open vulnerabilities on those systems there are. And then what is the total number of count of how many vulnerabilities are past your SLA? So let's say your SLA is we patch everything in 30 days and less. And we look at Qualys and we say, oh, we have 5 vulnerabilities that are, greater than 30 days. And so you can go and record these metrics. And I call it the Cyber Six Pack because it was designed for an organization that has 6 managers. But if you actually go in the settings, you can choose the names of the tools. So maybe you have more or less cybersecurity application security tools. Maybe you have more or less managers. And maybe you want to change the months that are displayed on the executive summary view. So it's just a simple way where you can come in and look, and you'll see it's color-coded red versus green if they're hitting that SLA, and you can see the trend lines to know, are you making the right progress, especially as an organization looking across your totals.
That sounds awesome. So we got a nice little tote board here. It's a great way to hold people accountable and get everybody visibility, almost like a Kanban board, if you will, for how we're doing in terms of our configurations. Awesome.
Exactly. All right. So that takes us to our next one. And this is probably my favorite one. It's called the Cybersecurity Budget Template. And this is based on a lot of the things I've tried to do to simplify cybersecurity budgets. And the idea being the following: CapEx, OpEx is a little complicated. Sometimes I even struggle because I don't feel like I'm a certified accountant who knows all the regulations. So I made something simple that I could really understand. And so I use this concept called the total cost of ownership. And total cost of ownership consists of three major buckets. The labor costs. Hey, if I have 10 people that on average I pay $200K for, that means I spent $2 million in labor costs for this project. The licensing costs, maybe I have to pay a SaaS subscription fee, or I have to pay Oracle fees. That may be another $50,000. And then hosting costs. Perhaps I have to pay to host my infrastructure on-prem or on AWS or GCP or Azure. Usually there's some cost to store and run your servers. And within the labor costs, I actually break that down into two things that have to add to 100%. So think of, if you spend 90% of your time on new features, amazing, you'd only have 10% of the time left for operations and maintenance. But what if it was the reverse? You spent 90% of your time just keeping that server alive, and you really couldn't add any new features to this, system with only 10% remaining for new features. Now, within this matrix, what you're going to see, it looks very much like an Excel spreadsheet where you can take each of these service categories, and you'll actually see the default example aligns to the CIS 18's controls. And we break down what are the labor, licensing, and hosting costs. And we create that first year total cost of ownership. And you can also do a 2-year and a 3-year, forecast of where that goes. And so this really allows you to go in and say, hey, this is, how our budget is going to grow from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. And is that where we think we're in line with the CFO's expectations? So I think this is a super, super helpful thing. I've also created some, overarching views. You can see what percent of your budget is in labor costs versus licensing and hosting. You can actually go in and see what are your most expensive services. So as you start to, look and say, which is most expensive? I think the SOC is probably it for most companies. But in this example with fake data, you'll just see it just shows as application security software. So hopefully that gives, a helpful thing that every CISO and cybersecurity leader can use during their budget planning session. And also notice you can add your own regulations in here, as well as add, what are the exact names of the tools that you're using. So I think it's a pretty helpful matrix here.
It is, and I love that regulation because it allows us to then go ahead, and if management says we need to cut money back on certain thing, you can say, well, this is required by HIPAA, or it's required by NYDFS. We're a public company. Do you really want to be out of compliance? It's the cost of doing business. And speaking of cost of doing business and budgets, that's really kind of the gist of your book. Kind of a little plug for it in right now. Cybersecurity's Dirty Secret: Why Most Budgets Go to Waste. You came out with that in November 2025, and it's an awesome book. And you probably have one you're going to hold up right now. I'm on travel, so I don't have it. Ta-da! There we go. Quick little plug for Ross's book. But definitely, if you haven't read it, get a copy. And there's also a course available on CISO Tradecraft that if you want to study similar materials as well along that, you can do that as well. But let's stay focused here. But we got a little plug in there for it. And you can find that on Amazon. And I think, do we have a link on our website that you can click through and find the book?
Yeah.
Not, we'll put one.
Yeah. So if you go to our website here and you look at there's a little link called Store. And on the store, you can click, it'll take you directly to our Amazon page where you can find the book. And we also even have some swag or merchandise. So if you want a little coffee mug or a pair of socks that says CISO Tradecraft, you could find those there as well.
Yeah, I had a gentleman at a talk I did last month who was wearing one of the CISO Tradecraft ball caps. I saw when the order came in. I realized, he's the next town over. And he said, I see you talking and presenting, so I got one. So I said, hey, give me your address and I'll mail you some CISO Tradecraft stickers, which I did. And he appreciated that. So let's get back to looking at the cybersecurity tools murder board. Now, it's not as violent as you think, but it's a very, very useful tool for deciding what should survive and what should not when you're really trying to looking at budget crunches. So let's take a look at that next.
Yeah, so the murder board is essentially a tools rationalization exercise, but I think cybersecurity murder board just sounds way cooler. And really what it is you look at each one of the tools or functions that you're doing and you compare two metrics. The first is a coverage utilization metric. So you can say, hey, is data loss prevention, is it installed on 21% of the endpoints? Or maybe it's installed on 80% of the endpoints. And then you go in and you say, within the DLP tool, how many of the important features did we turn on? And let's just say there's 10 important features we need to turn on, but we've only turned on 7 of the 10 important features. So in this example, you have 80% coverage times 70% utilization, which means your effective protection score, when you multiply those two variables, is actually 56%. And you would go and do this for each of your tools. And the reason why is because I have found people are very surprised to figure out their implementation is actually not as good as you think. If you have a web application firewall that's only deployed on 50% of your web applications, and you've actually turned off 8 of the OWASP top 10 rules, that would be very different than one that's fully deployed on 100% of the applications and 100% of the OWASP top 10. And if you don't know that, you're just blind to how well these things are actually securing your organization, despite the cost you may be paying for those solutions. And
this is a great way to test our efficiency, particularly when you're in a budget crunch and you go back and you say, guys, we've been paying for this thing for years and it's not exactly shelfware. But if our effective protection score is under 20% or some threshold like that, we're like, either we need to up our game or we need to just say, can we live without it?
Yeah. And so I think this is a great exercise that you can come in during your first 90 days as a CISO to just really try to get an understanding of where things may not be very effective. And then this gives you the idea to come in and say, should we get rid of this tool or should we really make sure it's an effective deployment? The other thing is it also has that total cost of ownership on the right, similar to the budget exercise. And you can put in maybe a success narrative of, hey, this tool actually stopped this many attacks last year that were really critical that no other tool could have caught. And sometimes that's always a little hard to just tell unless you put a narrative around that. So I think this is probably the most famous one. I hear a lot of people being like, oh my goodness, I love using murder boards. And I hope everybody gets a chance to try the tool.
Well, that sounds great. So let's talk about Gen AI, because that's going to be something that I think is kind of front and center for an awful lot of CISOs and other security leaders. And then, of course, the risk that comes with it. Now, it turns out that as often takes place, the state of California kind of comes out first with some sort of a context or some concept for cybersecurity. So let's take a look at what we've got here for the Gen AI risk assessment.
Yeah, so the Gen AI risk assessment comes from this standard called the California General AI Risk Assessment, known as CIM 5305-F. And when you look at it, you'll actually go and see it's just really well done. Like they really spell out all the different types of PII data and others. And so what I've done is basically digitize that form to make it easier for organizations to go and fill out informations. So imagine as a CISO, you're part of an AI working group and you need to govern the use of AI applications in your organization. You might go in and create this type of questionnaire or use my form where people can enter, what's the PII of said application? And then afterwards, they can start to go in and fill out other information about what is the risk. Maybe it's a high confidentiality, medium integrity, medium availability, and then it's actually being used for a mission critical application. And if you do that, it'll actually take you to this safeguards page where you can talk about what are you doing to go above and beyond and really secure your application, right? Do you, follow any of these important safeguards like user accounts for Gen AI tools are managed directly through an access management tool, not through something that developers can just willy-nilly change. Or, hey, you're protecting data from being exposed to the internet. Maybe it's run as an internal application. And you go and you put all of these things through, and then eventually you complete the assessment, and it gives you, some type of report where it shows you, hey, what things were compliant or not compliant, and allows you to save everything as an image or download the JSON to use for your organization.
Wow, that sounds really helpful, especially I like the way you get that executive summary at the end. Now, the next sheet you have is based on a model that you had built a couple of years ago that I love. I actually kind of really like the mascot you have, and OWASP now has that as their threat and safeguard matrix, but you were kind of the guy behind this. So let's take a look and get inside your head a little bit. And this is really based initially on some of the work that Sunil you did, which was based on the NIST cybersecurity framework. So it's an awful lot of shoulders of giants, if you will, that were involved. But this, I think, puts you in, this got you started on the list of becoming one of the cybersecurity giants. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, so Sunil Yu built something called the Cyber Defense Matrix, where he puts the NIST functions, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and then puts in different technology layers as well as humans and identities. And what I liked about it was a really interesting way to organize, all of the tools being built by organizations in the cybersecurity space. And I modified that to, instead of listing the types of technologies, to put the types of material threats. So if you come down to the bottom, you can actually look at a bunch of different types of threats. So maybe you're worried about brand impersonation or business email compromise and say those are material threats to my organization. And then what you do is you fill out, how you're going to do something. So imagine business email compromise. How would I identify where I'm vulnerable? Well, maybe I really worry about executives. Maybe I really worry about admins because they have extra permissions. Or maybe I really worry about people on the accounting team that could, authorize money to be sent. And then what would I do to block those types of attacks, right? Maybe because it's coming in via email, I might have an email security gateway. I might go in and put in all the other features. And so what you do is you start to fill out this matrix, and now you have a simple way to explain to executives how you're going to stop material threats. And you can even start to put some costs around this as well. And then say, for this material threat, this is the cost of building this robust defense in depth approach of your safeguards to your organization.
What I love about this is a threat-informed way of thinking. A lot of times we tend to be product-centric or function-centric, but this really takes us to say, let's back up a little bit. Say, what are we really worried about? If we're the type of organization where a national level advanced persistent threat team is going to work on it 24/7 until they get in, it's a little bit different than if you are not that critical and maybe your biggest concern is a disgruntled employee or some random kid hacking in mom's basement. So with that understanding, then we can then break this out. And this is incredibly useful for being able to, if you will, personalize what we're doing with respect to the individual threat. So someone says, what are you doing? But why are you doing it? You can explain very well the why. So let's talk about people next, because you've got a personal values exercise, which I found very intriguing, and it kind of discovered what drives you. So let's take a look at this.
Yeah, so this is one, it's called the personal values exercise. And what you'll know is there's all these different values at the bottom about what people really care about. So maybe they care about advancement, maybe they care about adventure, maybe they care about status, they care about being able to work alone, influence people, high pay, different things like that. And what you do is you'll notice that there are 5 separate columns, from always valued, where you can only place 5 of these things, to never valued. And so what you're going to do is you're going to click and move your values into these different areas. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have a completed, let's call it personal values exercise. That's kind of similar in some ways towards a Myers-Briggs assessment. you'll be able to learn something about yourself that you didn't really understand. And so by going and putting all of these things into the different fields, let's just say in this example that I just randomly pulled one, my top 5 values are I care about advancement, I care about aesthetics, I care about affiliation, artistic creativity, and being in a fast-paced environment. Well, if I have to choose between 2 jobs, which one allows me to do more of these 5 things that I really value? Because that's the one that's going to bring me the greatest happiness at work. And there's other ways to actually use this. I really like using it in the January timeframe with the team to go and figure out what people really like. And now I can go in and find ways to motivate people instead of just promotion or bonuses. If they really care about fast-paced environment and some of this artistic creativity, then how do I assign tasks like that as a manager that I think they're really going to enjoy? Now they're happier. I'm getting people who really want to do the work that I need done, focused on these things, and we both win. So I think it's a really fun exercise you can do with your team. You can also, save the image or save the PowerPoint just in case you want to come back to this or share it from year to year. I also recommend using it as a parent, figuring out what your kids like. Because here's the dirty secret. Everybody tries to use the way that they value. But if the way that other people are valuing things is completely different than yours, you're going to give the exact wrong advice. It matters what they value, not what you value when you're coaching someone and mentoring someone or parenting someone. So learning what drives people can really improve your ability to be an effective leader, manager, or father, or mother, what I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's great. And the forced distribution, as we used to call it in the military, where you could only put 20% of your people in the top category and the next 20 here, and then everybody else could be in lower ones, requires you to do some deep thinking. I can't have 10 always valued. I have to say, make some hard decisions. But you're right. As a mentoring tool, it's excellent because you gain some insight in terms of what motivates others and how to align perhaps their job tasking for the next coming year and even their career path along the line. Now, recognize that these are preferences, that sometimes we do the things we don't value because it's part of the job. That's why we get a paycheck. But at the same time, if most of the time I go to work and I'm doing stuff that resonates, you're going to have higher job satisfaction, usually better performance, and perhaps better retention as well. Okay, and well, in the few minutes remaining, let's get through the last 3 that we have here on our cybersecurity templates. Let's take a look at process improvement exercise and how can we get better at doing a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, so there's this concept that really comes from Lean Six Sigma, which is how do we look at all the steps in a process to figure out where the choke points are, where things really slow things down and degrade the entire process. And so what we can do is we can go in and say, here are the, let's call it 15 steps of a process. And you'll just see the example is for vulnerability management. And then you go in and you figure out what is the average time it takes for this process to finish in minutes or hours. And then you go in and you talk to all the smart people in your organization to say, how fast could we optimize this to? And so maybe instead of Qualys scanning every 2 hours, we could have Qualys scan every 10 minutes. And doing so would actually, improve our performance by 110 minutes if we were to fix that. And you would go through and do this exercise for each of the 15 steps. And then by doing that, I actually create a Pareto chart where you can say which steps would reduce 80% of the total time suck in this broken process or slow process. And now you can figure out that I don't have to fix all 15 steps to make this thing 80% better. I only have to fix 2 steps. And now I know which 2 steps to go and fix. And so in this example, it's perform regression testing and passing a change approval process. So maybe you have to go through a weekly change approval board where people just sit and wait till next Wednesday's meeting. Well, that just seems like a waste of time. Versus if we could put something in, some type of GitHub pipeline, well, now they could send it and get that approved in 10 minutes once they get the person to click the box and sign off. And so things like this, I just find are really, really good at improving our slow processes.
And that's awesome. As I say, it's a really good diagnostic to go through and realize, as you say, we have a chain of events There might be one that's horribly inefficient to say, if we fix this, we collapse down our overall time frame. So you look at some of these things like step 10, regression testing, that's 0.5% effective. If you could improve that, and then the change approval, as you had said, you're there. You haven't made things perfect, but good enough. Perfect's the enemy of good enough. And we can make things go from poor to good enough. And that sounds like an awesome tool. Okay, let's take a look at the last two tools that we have up here with the risk approval template, which I think this kind of looks familiar to a lot of us, but it's a great way to display it and drop things onto a matrix in terms of what are the benefits versus the risk or exposure.
Yeah. So the big thing that I want you to notice is we're kind of combining essentially a risk approval process, but we've changed a couple of things. First of all, you can go in and edit any of these fields. So if you don't want a network routing upgrade, you could go in and put, unable to patch a server. So basically, all these fields in blue are editable. And then you also have a risk appetite matrix. And this is different because it shows the risk and exposure, let's call that the impact, versus the benefits, not the likelihood. And so what we're saying is, hey, let's say we're going to go adopt AI. Well, how much do we think that's actually going to make more money to the company? Well, if they say, well, we expect this to increase our sales by $3 million, we can now put it in the strategic place. And then we would say, if this went totally bad, how bad would that be? Well, we only think it could cost, $500K. So now we say it's at this 1 million to 10 million because it's at 3 million for strategic benefit. And then we're going to go in and move the X. And now, because of the difference here, we're going to see it's kind of marked as a green, which is according to our risk appetite operation permitted. So just different ways you can kind of go, and you'll see that this dynamically changes depending on where you are. And you can also change the values here for your organization. So just a simple risk approval that we think makes a little bit more sense and actually holds the business accountable to the benefits as well as cyber to the risk and exposure.
Okay, let's wrap up with the toil register. See what we've got here.
Yes, but not least is the toil register. And the idea being, how many times do we have an incident where we do a root cause analysis and we say, oh, this broke, and what was the 5 whys and how we got there? And so what we're trying to do is create something similar where you can go in and essentially you can add an item and say, how did this thing happen? What was the root cause? What is our plan to fix? And what is our KPI? And now you can actually go and track these things to making sure each of these root causes of your incidents totally gets remediated, much like you would track something on a risk approval, tool. And the huge advantage here of doing this is you now have a centralized way to look at all of your toil. And so just think of like how many alerts in your dashboard are maybe not very accurate in your SOC dashboard. And so you can say, well, we're going to have to go rewrite all of these, and here's the reason why. And now you have a thing that you can actually go and document and show your process improvement for the year.
That sounds wonderful. So we've covered in our broadcast 12 different cybersecurity templates, which are available at no cost at CISO Tradecraft and courtesy of Ross Young and his vibe clothing and things such as that. Do you want to say hello? I've got my grandson here, and he is enjoying his Christmas. Say hello, wave. All right, even if he's not. So, wait, I better at least get him on a podcast. And he can look back years later and said, that's where he was back then? Yep, because his dad runs pen testing team and kind of like in the family, we're doing cybersecurity. So for you out there in CISO Tradecraft land, hopefully you found this a really helpful tool. Podcast. It will let you know what's out there for resources. Come to CISOTradecraft.com. Take a look around, see what we've got. Take a look at the book, too. I think Ross's book is absolutely awesome. We've built that over the period of a year, and it's a lot of effort, and it's condensed into one place where you can use that as a repository of knowledge to how you can better manage your budgets as well. So we're wishing you the best in the new year for 2026. Thank you very much for being a watcher or a listener of CISO Tradecraft. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. Make sure you follow us on LinkedIn. We have more than just a podcast, a good steady stream of information. And on behalf of my co-host Ross Young, it's G. Mark Hardy. Thank you very much for being part of CISO Tradecraft, and stay safe out there.